then the third film that can be found in this Lars von Trier's Europe trilogy is the film which is described as being from the year 1991. And it is this work, which is EUROPA. And what another fascinating film this is. So EUROPA, we have, again, directed by Lars von Trier, and producers Bo Christensen and Peter Olbeck Johnson. And we have the cast included, which are Jean-Marc Barr and Barbara Squaw and Udo Kier and others. And we have a film which is set, I think, very purposefully in a type of cinematically constructed past of post-war Germany. We have the immediacy of the trauma of the Second World War, I think, on display quite evidently in a lot of the visual stylings of the film, both externally and internally. And we have the context of this almost post-war thriller set against the backdrop of the train, or the metaphor of the train and the train conductor and the train carriage, and the journey to some kind of illumination into a reckoning with the past, or a further, say, a road down the path of the unknown, or a further sense of unknown. So, and then throughout this film, there are so many visual flourishes of, say, suspenseful style that have a almost science fiction special effects quality that is very endearing, that's very cinematic, that calls attention to the fact that it is a cinematically constructed story. It feels almost like a dark fable in many ways. That's also a post-war spy thriller in many ways as well as a doomed, tragic tale, or a sense of doom, or a sense of tragedy, a sense of the possibility of romance or love, or the lack thereof, again, depending on how the film proceeds. And you have to watch to the end of the film to figure out if indeed things work out the way that one hopes, or they work out in another way. And then as well, the way in which the historical past is being reckoned with, again, here in the context of Europa. So we have, much like in the past films, we have, but at the same time, a very specified place and time, post-war Germany or post-war Europe, after the traumas of what has immediately occurred, but also the way in which deceptions have occurred, betrayals have occurred. The repair of a type of psychological damage is ongoing, and that repair of psychological damage could be said also to find its cinematic voice in the very externalized ways in which the world is presented in this. I mean, this is a world-building type of film that shows us the landscape, that feels very ultra-realized, and has a way of harkening back to a type of past that's almost, it could be said to be having a sense of a jarred or jagged psychological scarring or trauma, much like the works of Kafka. And I think the word Kafkaesque has been used to describe the trappings of this film Europa, which I think is a very apropos term. It also has a sense, in the sense that one can say that this is a film that seems to be about a loss of identity, also the way in which people seem to be trying to reconfigure their identities in the context of the currency of the present, and also the immediacy and also the distance of the past. And that immediacy and distance is evident in the fact that we see a lot of the results of the past on display. A lot of the remnants of the war are still there, both in terms of the damage of the landscape and the environment and the building, but also a lot of the human toll that has occurred as well. That's still on display in many of the scenes as well. So there's a sense of the immediacy of the past, but also a distance of the past too, because the way in which a lot of the rooms and interiors are constructed in a world like Europa, we have a sense of almost almost a forced classicism, almost a type of unreal Baroque quality, which I think lends itself very, very nicely to this sense of being off kilter, off balance. We have a sense of the disturbing nature of the immediate aftermath of the war, but also a sense of maybe wanting to deny the immediate violence of that in favor of some kind of romanticized version of the past in order to make way for a historical reckoning, and thus make way for some kind of hope for the future. Or maybe that hope is a completely maybe misplaced, and there is no hope indeed. Again, depending on the outcomes of these various psychological journeys that each of these characters are on, or they seem to be on. There's also, in that way too, then the film, like the other films too, gives us a sense of how the characters seem to be trying to deal with the immediacy of the past, but also the distance of the past, and how that is in many ways trying to give people a sense of who they are, trying to give people a sense of the ability of discovering who they are. So in that way, in my own very limited way of expressing it, one can say this has a kind of Kafkaesque type of quality to it. Also, in terms of the emotional baggage that seems to be a part of the psychological portraits of the storytelling. Also, on a visual style or a visual flair, we have very much the way in which technique of cinema is on display, overlapping of images, certain use of, say, special effects work or model work, the way in which images and close-ups are overlapping within each other, the way in which this world seems to be a constructed world on the one hand, but also the camera moves and camera techniques give a sense of flourish and style and life to this otherwise wholly constructed sense of the world of Europa, such that we have cinematic technique on display. It could be said in many ways to be maybe borrowing from certain techniques and style of, say, Alfred Hitchcock, or maybe the cinematic key figures of, say, expressionism in various parts of Germany and others in the 1920s, etc. So we have the way in which cinema itself is on display, and the idea of construction is on display. And while also being a very Lars von Trier work, because we have the past and the reckoning with the past, but sometimes that past may or may not be what we seem to think it is based on what we see. In other words, what we see may not be what really is. And we're not quite sure what things are. We might think we are sure, and then we might be comforted when we watch the film knowing that we have a certain knowledge of what we think is true. But the more we think about it, the more we hear some of these stories, and the more we hear some of the dialogues between the characters, the more disjointed we understand things are, and the more unsure we become. And the more unsure we become, I think, the more unsure we become as to what indeed we think we are seeing. I think that's part of the power of a film like Europa. It's a film that's so realized visually in terms of what it seems to be announcing itself to be, which is it's a constructed film about post-war Europe, and this spy thriller set against the backdrop of this constructed world of post-war Europe. But the more we see it, the more we involve ourselves in it, the more we realize that it's not, it seems perhaps to be something other than what it has initially announced itself to be. And that is, I think, for me anyway, one of the great hallmarks of the work of Lars von Trier. Lars von Trier's works, as embodied by Europa or the other films in this, The Element of Crime and Epidemic, I think each has its own way of announcing itself on the one hand as a film that seems to be announcing itself in a way that is identifying itself in our minds in terms of initial watch, but the more we realize or the more we watch it, the more we can understand or potentially understand that it maybe is something completely different from what we realize. Maybe what people are talking about are indeed lies or emotional memories that are in fact ephemeral and not even exactly what they say, and things that are told to us may not be the truth themselves. And so if that's the case, then what we are seeing may not be wholly true indeed. And that goes along to not just the historical reckoning or the reckoning with our historical past, but also the way in which we engage with cinema. What we see is something that tempts us to want to believe is real. But is it really real, or is it something that is wholly illusory? And if that's the case too, then how do we deal with these types of stories and these types of tropes and these types of questions that are asked and posed upon us? And if work like Europa, and that type of ongoing conversation is what's so fascinating and exciting when I watch Europa, as well as the the historical-based questions that it seems to be asking, or not asking, as the case may be, while also being this post-war spy thriller in a way. Who's who, and who are we really to believe that the people are who they say they are? Perhaps are there some hidden agendas along the way, while set against the backdrop of this wonderfully constructed universe of the train setting and the exteriors and interiors and the like, as well as great appearances of cast and crew. And I say cast and I say crew as well, without spoiling too much of the surprises. There are a lot in store for those who have yet to see this great film, which is again part of this set, which is Europa. Okay, so now let's go to the disc for Europa. And Europa has a number of supplements as well. First up is the commentary. We have 2 commentary tracks. We have one with Lars von Trier and Peter Olbeck, and then the other with von Trier and Jean-Marc Barr and Udo Kier, which this being in English. So I think the first commentary track, that being in the Danish language, it talks, I think, a lot about the technical aspects, working with the actors, the choice of casting, use of rear projection and other cinematic techniques and tricks that are used very effectively in this film, the use of color photography, black and white photography, and the way in which this is used to create a sense of world or presence or style. So this is very fascinating commentary track. It's accompanied by the second commentary track, which is equally fascinating. Again, talking about certain anecdotes of casting, anecdotes of shooting on set or location, as the case may be. There's some anecdotes about glasses as well, which is very amusing and endearing as well. And it's great to hear Jean-Marc Barr and Udo Kier as well, and their interactions with Lars von Trier. So I think the 2 commentary tracks, they have different approaches to, which is great. It's great to have 2 separate commentary tracks that have a different style or setting or talking about different things. So it gives you the option, one or the other. So, or both, if you decide to watch the film on 2 separate occasions with each of the commentary tracks respectively. So, which I strongly recommend. So. Those are the 2 commentary tracks for Europa. And then the supplements continue on with a making of Europa, which is from 91. It's approximately 39 minutes. And here there's direct references to filmmakers that I mentioned before, like Hitchcock, like Tarkovsky, and the idea too of a sense of shooting on location, but also the constructed feel of it. The idea of a storybook or fable quality of the film, also the fascination with trains and the European setting and aesthetic appeal to it, the idea of use of narration. This is a film that is very much has the narration quality to it, and I don't want to go into too much detail about it. Again, I want to preserve a lot of the surprises for those who haven't seen the film, but and also the concept of the films in service of a trilogy construction. So. This is Making of Europa, approximately 39 minutes. And then the second supplement, we have Anecdotes from Europa. This is, again, the other anecdotes like we saw in the other discs. This is approximately 20 minutes. We have people who are members of or participants in the making of the film, as well as others. So we have Shepard again, Barr, Olbeck, Gislason, Versel, and others. And talking about there's some sort of anecdotes about near-shooting accidents and sort of style and sort of postmodernism aspects of the slant of the approach to the storytelling, as well as other visual cues and quotes as well. So the anecdotes features, I really enjoy them in the past discs, the Element of Crime disc and also Epidemic disc, and so I really enjoy it here as well for Europa. Next up in the supplements, we have it's called Lars von Trier Anecdotes, and this is also from the year 2005. It's approximately 16 minutes, and we have a number of persons who have worked with Lars von Trier, and they give their sort of honest assessments with regard to what they think about working with him and their professional relationships and the like. And so we have comments from people like Manon Rasmussen, costume designer, and others, and talking about their impressions about the filmmaker. And so I think this is really important. They're really fascinating because one of the things I think about Lars von Trier, which I think forms another one of those maybe fascinating or controversial aspects of a consideration of his works, is his maybe public persona, or how he endeavors to carry on his public persona, and I think that has made itself evident through a number of say a number of times, some of which has been perhaps very highly publicized, for instance. But regardless of what you think of the filmmaker and the films, I think it's fascinating to see some perspective as to what other professional artists and collaborators have felt with regard to working with Lars von Trier. And here we get, I think, some really fascinating assessments about, there's a comment made about how perhaps Lars von Trier on purpose sometimes wishes to have a type of public persona that's seen to be somewhat antagonistic or perhaps even difficult, but that might be part of his own, say, personality. And in fact, working with him on a film or in a sort of professionally intimate way in terms of the creation of some kind of end product that is the work of cinema, has a lot of challenges, also has a lot of rewards, professional rewards as well. And I think that type of respect that's shown towards the Lars von Trier as an artist, I think, is very fascinating indeed. So you get a number of those comments here. Also about how Lars von Trier as an artist is an artist that seems to have no compromises, and so he's very dedicated to his vision, his artistic vision. That type of aspect, I think, comes through. And so these comments come in the context of certain, say, stories or anecdotes against the backdrop of a film like Europa, but it can also be said to be part of the ongoing discussion of Lars von Trier as an artist going forward. So if you're fascinating, or if you're curious about what some other people might think of Lars von Trier, this is, I think, a really great place to go, because I think they give real honest assessments based on their work with him. So this is Lars von Trier Anecdotes, and it's approximately 16 minutes. And then to continue on, we have another supplement, which is Emotional Music Script for Europa. And this is also from the year 2005, and this is 11 minutes, or approximately 11 minutes. And this is with respect to the music, Holbeck, composer Holbeck, and Joachim Holbeck. And so we have comments here about the use of the music, the application of the sounds in the music in the context of the conceit, the main metaphorical conceit of the story, that is the train. And there's a way in which there's a heavily applied visual sense to the film Europa, which I think is echoed and supported and buttressed very, very well, and very triumphantly by the application of the music here. So it's very emotional, it's very revealing, it's also very classical, it's also very progressive in a lot of ways. So the Emotional Music Script for Europa from 2005, approximately 11 minutes. Next up, we have Conversation with Lars von Trier, and this is also from the year 2005, approximately 43 minutes. And so we have more context and discussion from von Trier himself. Again, talking about Europa, but also I like this conversation or this interview with him because he's also talking about the trilogy as a whole, the Europe trilogy. Work with Wurzel, for example, who has appeared in a number of the other previous supplements throughout the set itself. The letter E, the significance of the letter E in the context of this Europe trilogy, Element of Crime, Epidemic, Europa. The significance of geographical places and locations, both in the currency of the moment and also the historical past, specifically Germany. And also filmmakers that have been mentioned before, like the importance of the reference point of Tarkovsky, the cinema of Tarkovsky. Also, there's some discussion here from Lars von Trier about how he feels about, say, other filmmakers like David Lynch, which is very interesting as well. And then just going back to the works of von Trier, his application and his treatment and his philosophical approach to things like comedy and humor, mythology, symbolism, and also hypnotism, and how hypnotism is used to either deceive or to reveal, and the like, etc. As well as the use of, say, Danish, the films in the context of Danish cinema, how they coincide or collide with the previously held general concepts of sort of the identity of Danish cinema, etc. Perspective in history, and also the fetishization of certain objects or symbols throughout the context of the trilogy itself. So very fascinating stuff, very great stuff. A 43-minute conversation with von Trier. I thought this would be a nice contextual conversation regarding Europa, as well as us taking a step back and looking at the trilogy writ large. I thought it was really great. So please check it out if you can. Approximately 43 minutes. And just continuing on, or concluding the discussion of the supplements, we also have what's called Trier's Element, and this is approximately 43 minutes from Denmark Radio. And Lars von Trier, I think this is great too, because it features, among other things, some aspects of the 1991 premiere and Cannes Film Festival and the press conference, etc. So again, it's nice to see the currency of the times, how Europa was received upon initial release, or the sense of that, and also its kind of long-lasting legacy going forward. So this is Trier's Element, 43 minutes. And then also concluding the supplements with a trailer. I should mention, too, that I forgot to mention, I apologize, that I think in our discussion of the Elements of Crime supplement, there's also the trailer. So the trailer exists for here, and then also for Epidemic, and also for Europa on the each of the discs respectively. So that also includes Europa for purposes of the supplements on this third Blu-ray disc.